Hey, today we will dive into Context API of React because it's really popular interview question. And you should be also familiar with this mechanism to be more effective React developer. Alright, let's get started. The Context API in React is a mechanism that enables efficient data sharing between components without the need to pass props down through each level of the component tree. It's particularly useful for managing global states, where various components require access to the same data, such as user authentication status, theme preferences, or language settings. Context API shines when you encounter prop drilling, repetitive passing of props from parent to child components. Instead of cluttering your code with prop passing, you can wrap your components with a context provider to make the data accessible to all nested components. This results in cleaner and more maintainable code. However, it's important to consider that using context for every piece of data may not be optimal. For complex state management or shared application level data, the Context API is a powerful tool to simplify your React development process. Our first tip is all about understanding the basics of the Context API. Let's start with importing what we need. We create a context, myContext, using createContext. This will allow us to share data across components. Next, we'll define a context provider, myProvider. Inside it, we'll set our context value, hello from context. It's like a global data hub. We wrap child components with myContext provider to give them access. Lastly, we consume the context in myComponent using useContext hook. The context data is displayed within a div, and that's how Context API makes data sharing in React. Moving on to tip number 2, we are going to explore how to use multiple contexts in our app. This is essential when dealing with complex state structures. Here we are creating two contexts, context A and context B, using createContext. This will help us manage different pieces of data. Next, we define two context providers, provider A and provider B. They will wrap child components, exposing their specific context values. Now let's consume these contexts. In multi-context component, we use useContext hook to get data from both contexts. And voila! By consuming context A and context B, we display the data they provide. This way, React helps us manage various types of data effectively with multiple contexts. Remember, you can use as many contexts as you need, and useContext simplifies accessing their values without nesting. When consuming a context, it's essential to handle cases where the context provider might not be in the component tree. You can provide default values for the context to avoid unexpected errors. We create a context, myContext, with a default value. It ensures a fallback if no provider is found. Moving on, we've got myProvider wrapping children with a specific value. Then, in myComponent, useContext hook comes to the rescue. We are consuming myContext with the default or provided value. Simple, right? React's Context API with default values keeps things smooth even when providers are missing. Tip number 4 deals with context composition, an essential concept for building modular and maintainable applications. We've got user context and theme context, both created using createContext. Moving on, in the app component, we provide values for these contexts. For user context, it's John and admin. And themes context gets dark. Now inside the profile component, we're consuming both contexts using useContext hook. We are accessing the user's data and the theme. How cool is that? React Context API allows different parts of your app to efficiently access specific data. By combining contexts, you can achieve a clean component structure and maintain a clear separation of concerns. Last but not least, tip number 5 focuses on testing components that use context. Testing is crucial for maintaining a robust codebase. We've got a test context created using createContext, and for testing, we have a mock test provider that wraps our test component, providing a mocked test data value. Inside test component, we are consuming the test context using useContext hook. Now comes the fun part. We are using React testing library to render our component within the mock test provider. And with expect screen get by text, we are checking if mock test data text is in the rendered output. By following best practices in testing, you demonstrate your commitment to producing reliable and bug-free code. And there you have it. 5 useful tips to master the Context API for React interview questions. With functional components and hooks, you are well equipped to handle any context-related challenges that come your way. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like it and share it with your fellow developers. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with our future content. Thank you so much for joining me today. Wish you a pleasant technical interview experience. And until next time, happy coding!